With the growing popularity of smartphones and social networking sites like Facebook and Twitter, today's young people are faced with an ever diverse world. In an interview with Xinhua, Italian writer Paolo Giordano speaks of what he calls the distracted generation, a generation raised on the daily use of social networking and who have become accustomed to the perpetual distraction of its allure. Giordano's apt perception resulted in his best-selling debut novel, The Solitude of Prime Numbers. He was awarded Italy's most prestigious literary award, the Premio Strega. In the author's second novel, The Human Body, he writes about a platoon of young soldiers living in the desert as they fight in the Afghanistan war. Consequently, the author describes how only under such extreme circumstances can members of this so-called distracted generation rediscover their true identities. Both of your novels are somehow a coming-of-age story about people growing up and face themselves. But there's a slight difference, and the second book talks about war. So how did you come up with the topic?
I was looking for a metaphor of a young man when he turns into an adult person. When you give up a certain idea of you as a child, as someone innocent, as someone who always needs protection instead of someone who can give protection, all these things. And I think the experience of war is a very good metaphor for that, because war always somehow draws a line between the past and what happens afterwards, and it's a line that once you've crossed it, you cannot simply go back to what you were, and that's what happens when you grow up.
And you visited the camp in Afghanistan twice, and do you feel that the soldiers were as lost and displaced as described in your novel?
I think if you're 20 years old and you end up in the middle of a desert, carrying weapons and going around in a country that you don't understand anything about because it's so complicated, and you feel threatened by something, that would make anybody very displaced. Nobody can be prepared for what can happen out there.
And what do you think mark your generation of young people?
I always find that mine is a very sort of distracted generation. We're distracted by so many things, and we're kind of scattered in many places at the same time. The idea was that in order to be able to describe my generation, I had to put it in the middle of a desert with a threat coming from all around. So now they were trapped and they couldn't escape from that, and I could finally observe what they were.
And in the book Human Body, the attack that had changed the face of so many soldiers came very late in the novel, and you seem more interested in what had happened before that trauma.
And there's this moment of real war in the book that comes very late. What really matters is why did they end up there? How did they end up there?
Every character in Human Body is somehow going through somewhat a war, like with their family, with their girlfriends, with their everyday life. I mean, that is probably the war that everyone were going through. Maybe they will not go to the battlefield.
We all fight wars somehow in our everyday life. We all fight wars within ourselves. What really made sense to me and what I think was important is this analogy between the outside war that we now think is something very distant and abstract and that doesn't have anything to do with us, and what we do in our everyday life.
Paolo Giordano studied physics at the University of Turin and holds a PhD in theoretical particle physics. His first novel, The Solitude of Prime Numbers, sold over 5 million copies across the world and has been translated into over 30 languages. After his initial literary success, he decided to quit physics and devoted himself to writing novels full-time. So as a scientist, you were often dealing with facts or the approximation of facts, but as a novelist, you're writing fictions. And how did you make the transition?
I would say both in science and in science fiction, it's what really matters is the interpretation that you give of a certain fact, the perspective that you're looking at it. In the end, novels are a series of facts put together with some certain logic, and that's also what happens in maths. There's just a little more freedom in literature, and you have to take into account the fact that life is more chaotic than how you can predict it or think of it. So yeah, I like this idea that there are more degrees of freedom.
Is that the reason that you are abandoning scientific truth and turning to literature?
Yeah. When I was doing science, the idea that the problems I was dealing with had only one exact possible solution, it always frightened me somehow. So I always felt deeply frustrated until I got to that final solution. So it was like searching for a specific thing. Here, it's more like you can let yourself go and see what you find and then give a certain meaning to it.
And also you said you enjoy reading novels that show secrets or prohibited feelings that people are normally afraid of or scared of. And why is that?
I think we all have a very sort of intimate relationship with what we read with literature. So what is it that defines a relationship as intimate? I think it's the fact that you share very hidden and profound thoughts, even something you're slightly ashamed of. So that's what I want to see as a reader, and so that's also what I want to give as a writer, the sort of intimacy, sharing, forbidden things, I would say.
So when writing your own novels, are you also showing something, your true feelings about what you are afraid of, what you are ashamed of?
Your inner emotions, as well as your judgments about things, filter somehow through the way you're telling a story. Mm-hmm. They filter through what you decide to take out of it or what you decide to make more relevant. But as a narrator, you at least try to disappear more and more and let your characters step forward. But of course it's you behind, so a very clever and intuitive reader can of course infer a lot of what you are and what you think and what you feel, but I mean, he won't have any confirmation about it.
Both being a physicist and the life of a novelist require long periods of solitude. However, Giordano seems to thrive on this, placing emphasis on the state of loneliness and solitude in his writing. And both as a scientist or novelist, you often have to stay alone and think by yourself. Do you enjoy the solitude?
I do like the solitude of work. I stay there in my office for many hours. It's a space that is really mine, and sometimes it can be a little hard, but I still think it's a very big privilege, because it's a place where, apart from working, you really have the chance to elaborate things, think them over in details.
And so do you think loneliness is a positive or negative energy?
To me, it's always a sort of resource.
Resource of what? Of inspiration?
Of inspiration and of the possibility to make things slow down a little bit.
To listen to yourself.
Probably I'm a little bit slow in understanding what happens to me in life, so I always need that time of processing, and I can only do that if I'm alone.
But another phenomenon is that today's young people are more and more afraid of staying alone. They're constantly checking their email, their Facebook.
I'm not really that into
Social network?
Yeah, not really. I'm not on Facebook, I'm not on Twitter, and because I always feel something a little bit overwhelming and dry about all this technology and media's coming in. I mean, you need to devote to them a lot of your energy.
And the Solitude of prime numbers have sold huge numbers internationally. And what do you think are some of the universal elements that help the book cross the barrier of culture?
I think we all have troubles in dealing with specific things of our past. I mean, sometimes it takes a lifetime, sometimes a lifetime is not even enough to deal with those things. And we all have our specific sorrows, and that was really something that anybody could share.
So you help them better understand themselves, the secret part of themselves.
Reading a book, someone can simply feel that he's touched somewhere deeply. That's way more than enough. I mean, you already broke a sort of barrier between people, and that's the best thing a book can do, a novel can do from it.
What advice would you give to the young Chinese writers who aspire to success?
Not to aspire to success, because that's not the thing that's not the principal goal. I mean, the principal goal is to write the book you really want to write. Just imitate who you think is the best writer for you and try to write something as beautiful as that, or even slightly more. I think that should be the goal. And then success, readers, publication, they're all somehow consequences.